Father by Nim P. Pseudo. Chapter 5. I did not dream, for I lacked the means to. Only black pressed against me, inexorable and crushing. There was no sensation, no thought, no command. The blaze of purpose was extinguished within me, and for one midnight instant nothing drove me to act. I was not required to wait, or follow, or kill. All that remained for me was to sink into the void. But it did not last. Far-off voices flitted over me, at first too quiet to understand, yet they climbed steadily into coherence. Fragments of dialogue, like beams of light, lanced through the murk that ensorcelled me, sweeping it away and flooding my nothing with resonance. Do you believe that the little one will recover? Why do you insist on that title? What, little one? It is a suitable name for the vessel, don't you think? Considering its vertical challenges. And besides, the king also calls it as such. That is a reason enough. The king speaks in jest, I am sure. That name is just another of his dry humors. He does not indulge in such acts of affection. As far as you are aware. What? I would wager that you have not borne witness to our king's most private moments. As it is said, the toughest shells conceal the tenderest hearts. He must care for his creation in some way, yes? Do you not suspect that of our king, as I do? No, Okram. No, I do not. The voices receded, and the viscid dark closed in once again. But this time I was not left alone. Pain remained to jab at me like a molten spike. My head, my body, my limbs, they all ached as if they had been torn apart and stitched back together. And with the rising pain came another surf of voices to wash over me. Did the king teach you? Your powers, those healing arts, did he share his secrets with you? Is that how you became a great knight? Yes, I suppose. And? And what? Is there no tale to tell? Your legends must have a beginning, as all legends do. This persistence of yours will not lead to a pleasing revelation. It is best not to pry. Even so, I wish to know. Please, Isma. Fine. If that is what you wish. When I was but a small thing, the king recognized in me a certain aptitude. Perhaps he foresaw something in his many futures, but whatever intent drove him, he allowed me a glimpse into the nature of soul. I learned all that I could from the king, and then began my own studies. Many years of toil yielded up their knowledge, and I became something of an expert. That ability of yours, the way that you drink the soul from the life around you, was that part of the king's instruction? No, that was a result of my own insight, regrettable though it became. Listen, Okram, although I wish this topic to remain shrouded, it will come to light eventually. Such things always do, and for that, I think it is best that you hear the truth from me. Are you familiar with the Soul Sanctum? The Sanctum? With its rumors, yes, gruesome as they tend to be. What are you implying? That I had a claw in the Sanctum's founding. That without my meddling, it would never have come to be. That is no small secret. I begin to grasp your fears. But you must know, in its early days the Sanctum was a different sort of place, a center of scholarship and integrity. Before my knighting, I devoted much of myself into its betterment. Many advancements within the field of soul manipulation, healing, growth, regeneration, were thanks to my efforts. Although I am certain that the king resents my deeds. Why do you say that of our king? It would seem an unfitting hypocrisy to grant you knowledge and then condemn you for it. The more that I learned, the less tutelage the king was willing to offer. Study of soul is an infinite well, and and no matter how deeply I dove, there were always greater depths, more secrets to be devoured. I suspect that the king knighted me not for my prowess, but merely to draw me away from my research. And perhaps he was correct to do so. The sanctum's goal has long since been lost in its pursuit. The work toward prosperity has twisted into the obsession for power. I often wonder if the king foresaw this outcome, and it is merely another facet to his machinations. Perhaps we are all puppets upon silken strings. But enough. The truth is laid out, and you now know the source of my art, sordid as it is. You are welcome to revile me, if it so suits you, but expect no penitence. I did what was necessary, as I will continue to do.
Isma, I would never revile you.
Wait! The mending has begun. The voices ebbed away, but I no longer sank. A buoyancy, a swelling in my chest, lifted me from the clutching void. The shards of pain were pried from my body, and a cool embrace settled over me. The dark was wiped away like a coat of mud, and lumafly lanterns flared into my perception. Consciousness returned to me, and so too did the voices, but they did not quaver with distortion as they had before. I beheld Isma. She crouched over me, her fragile claws pressed against my mask. Trailing wisps of white light hung all about us like clouds of pollen. "It is done," she said, breathing heavily. "I've prepared its shell as best I can. It should heed your commands now." She half fell, half rolled back onto the dead grass and propped herself up with trembling arms. "If I had possessed more soul, then this mending would have been easier. But there is little left here to spare."
"Still, it was masterful work," Ogrim said, stepping close. "This incident would have come to a far more gruesome end without your art. It is my onus to admit that."
Isma continued to pant, her gaze upon the floor.
"So, is the little one awake?" Ogrim continued.
He looked down from the great pinnacle of his body.
"Are you all right?" he asked me. "Can you stand?"
I did not respond, but the words came to me as a command, like rushing water filling an empty basin. I pushed myself off the shriveled earth, and dregs of vertigo threatened my balance, but I did not fall. Lurien's garden stretched out before me, gray and lifeless. It was just as it had been before I lost awareness. Skeletal branches, blighted leaves, and disintegrating flower petals greeted me. Ash flaked off the vines that clung to the walls and fell like snow.
"Whoa, careful now,"
Ogrim murmured. He cupped a claw beneath my arm and steadied me.
"Your stalwart conduct is admirable, little one, but do not push yourself to such a breaking point. By the king's own words, you are a treasure of Hallownest. Always rest when you feel a need for it."
Isma leaned forward and wrapped her arms around her knees. "There is scant reason to coddle it, Ogrim. Learning the vessel's breaking point was the exact intent of this trial." Her voice grew hard, and it seems to have surpassed me in that aspect. Ogrim released my arm and cocked his head at Isma.
"What is this I detect? You called the little one incapable of resentment, but do you claim the same merit? That mutual amends I demanded was not merely for the sake of its pride, but also yours."
"Why would I care about such a thing?" Isma asked, tightening her grip on her knees. "One does not begrudge a training dummy."
Ogrim chuckled. "It is fortunate for us all that you are such a mighty warrior, great knight. Defeat comes to you so infrequently that you have not yet learned how to be graceful in it. Perhaps you should take a note from me. With all our sparring, I mastered that particular skill."
Isma rested her head on her knees, as if she could no longer hold it aloft. "Please, enough," she said, barely even a whisper.
Ogrim shifted from foot to foot. "I am sorry," he said. "That was clumsy. I had hoped a dash of Hagemo's humor might ease things, but He rested his armored bulk upon the ground. Sorry. I watched the pair, for no other purpose presented itself. The pain and weariness that had hung from me like serrated hooks were now gone. I stood tall once again. From across the desolate garden, Lurien approached. He kicked at flower husks and piles of ash, removing the meager obstacles from the cobbled path. His lower robes were caked with filth, as if he had been at the task for quite some time. He spied me and shuffled near. Repaired, Lurien observed tonelessly. Good. He extended 2 slim claws to explore the rectified contours of my mask. His touch was light, like droplets of water. Come, he said, as he turned away from the ravaged garden and set off toward the elevator shaft. And just as it had been before, Lurien's command clashed against Ogrim's. The 2 differing orders, one to stand and the other to follow, vied for supremacy within me. I leaned toward Lurien and took a ponderous step, and another. But a voice called out, dragging me to a halt. Wait, Ogrim said. He rose and wiped at the dust coating his shell. Watcher Lurien, where are you off to with the little one? Lurien drew a line with his gaze, from Ogrim to the elevator shaft and then back again. He repeated his command to me and resumed walking. Come. I lurched into motion, my legs stiff and faltering. I must insist. Please wait, Ogrim said, jolting me to a second stop. The king entrusted the little one to my care. Now that Isma is no longer in mortal danger, I would like to remain true to my charge. Grant us a moment to recuperate and we will accompany you. It is all right, Isma whispered. Doubtless the king has provided Lurien with his own instructions. He has as much a right to guide the vessel as we, and it is unreasonable for us to hinder him with my weary steps. She stood up, so laboriously that Ogrim reached out a claw to assist, but she shooed him away. I offer my thanks yet again, Watcher. Without your wisdom, then I would be a corpse, and the vessel might have been irreparably damaged. She offered a shallow bow, hardly more than a nod. Lurien's frame rose and fell, as if in a deep breath. He inched closer to the elevator shaft. Ogrim hunched beside Isma. Are we sure? He asked, hushed. The king will not be displeased? I do not possess Hagemel's chronicle of faultlessness, but that does not mean I take pleasure in failing at my duties. You need not worry. Our service here is done, Isma said. And besides, I too have a task in need of fulfillment that only you are suited for. Ogrim cleared his throat. Well, if I am needed, then I suppose things are concluded here. I certainly don't intend to suggest another sparring session. We've had more than enough excitement today. He lumbered over to me and leaned down. Little one. Little knight. This was quite an afternoon. A bit harrowing for my tastes, but you proved your worth and forced me to swallow my own presumptions yet again. You are ever a surprising one. Take care, and heed Lurien's every sparse word. He is likely a greater instructor than I will ever be. Ogrim patted the top of my head, and then swept into a bow. Yet again, Lurien repeated his command. It came from over his departing shoulder, terse and sharp. But this time no friction held me in place. Instead, a force, like a strong gust, pressed against my back, setting me into a trot. Lurien halted beside the elevator shaft and pulled the glittering lever. He did so with such meticulous slowness that its every inner mechanism clicked sequentially in a cascading melody. We waited as the chains jangled and the elevator ascended from deep below. Behind us, the 2 knights' voices were made audible only by the echo of the chamber. Will you forgive it? Ogrim asked. For what? Besting me? I have given my answer. No, for forcing this side of yourself into the light, even if only before Lurien and I. Isma scoffed. Lurien was already well versed in my history.
and no duress compelled me to explain myself. It was my choice. I had always intended to tell you of this, but the correct time just never seemed to arrive.
Yes, but had the vessel not wounded you so, would you not—
Ogham, Isma blurted. It is quite cruel of you to assail me with these questions while I am so trained. When you are next on the brink of death, I will make sure to harry you in kind. Now, enough of this matter, please. The task that I have to offer is of no small importance, and it must be done in secret. Not a single witness. Do you understand?
Very well. It is not my intent to vex you, Ogham said. Now, what do you require of me? Although it seems an ominous request, I vow that your secret will be kept.
Good, Isma said. The echoes died for an instant. I am not so proud that I would deny the facts. I am weakened and in sore need of my grove. It is no short jaunt away, and as much as I wish to, I cannot rally even a single step. So, with that said, would you carry me there?
Would I? Ogram's laugh danced along the walls. Of course, but why the insistence on secrecy?
You know, bugs will talk. It is their way. I do not wish the commoners to see us in such a state.
There was an ample crowd at the mustering grounds, Ogham mused. Words of your injury will surely spread. I do not understand the point in attempting to conceal what is already known.
No, that is not— Isma cleared her throat. Yes, well, warrior bugs are a different lot from the squeamish citizens of the city. Hearing of a knight's weakness and witnessing it directly are two very different things.
Nonsense, Ogham rumbled. Take last month, for example. After my tumble into that bed of mushrooms, was it not you that dragged my stunned bulk out of the fungal wastes and through the city streets? The commoners did not wail and claw at their shells upon the sight of my failure.
Humor me, Isma murmured.
Fair enough. In any case, I call this a lucky stroke. I am offered a chance to repay one of my many debts.
Isma gave a cry, drawn between a squeak and a shriek. That was far too rash! I was not prepared! Again, Ogram's laughter rebounded.
How might I ferry you to your repose, fair lady? Upon my honor, I will not rest until you arrive in safety.
Careful that you do not choke on your own delight, Isma said, almost a chuckle. I would appreciate it if you remained to the side streets and alleys. From there we might find a passage into the royal waterways, where we are more likely to go unseen. And take the stairs, if you would, please. Elevators and I are not the dearest of friends.
So it shall be, Ogham said.
The voices faded, replaced by the sound of two heavy feet crackling through dead foliage, and I turned, unbidden, to snatch a glimpse of Ogram's back as he departed through the garden's far exit, Isma in his arms. With a clang, the elevator slammed to a stop, drawing my attention. Within it, standing serenely, was the attendant bug. He initiated a vibrant bow, but faltered upon noticing the state of the garden. His eyelids flickered for several seconds before he completed his bow and gestured us inside. He looked from Lurien to the garden in quick succession, but did not raise any questions. Rain battered the windows as we ascended, and with my restored strength I did not stumble or fall. We passed several floors, but none possessed doorways, only stone statues of Lurien gazing back in blind vigilance. Without warning, the elevator jerked still, so violently that our feet briefly left the floor. The room before us was murky and gray, devoid of lumifly lanterns. Lurien stepped out, beyond the reach of the elevator's feeble light, and I followed. He did not glance back at the attendant, and soon the clangor of chains announced the elevator's departure. Lurien approached the vague shape of a table and sifted through the dark. He took something up in his claws and made a jerking motion. There was a scream of metal upon metal, and a shower of sparks filled the air. The red pinpricks swirled and frolicked before winking out of existence. In their aftermath came the gentle quiver of flame. A candle, first one, then two, then a dozen, all lighting successively and casting a dull glow upon the room. The personal quarters of Lurien the Watcher came into focus, They were capacious, yet cluttered, lacking any sense of organization or purpose. Bookcases, chairs, desks, and work tables amalgamated into a labyrinth of fine shellwood. Reams of garnet silk were scattered upon the floors and served as carpet. The candles illuminating the discord shared in it, and were perched haphazardly on furniture, decorative poles, and slabs of chiseled stone. Rain-streaked windows encircled the quarters, separated only by supporting arches. They looked out over every region of the city, though much of the landscape was made inscrutable by shadow. Lurien took a long moment to scan the room, as if seeing it for the first time. He turned to me and nodded, almost meekly. We weaved past scroll-strewn shelves and lustrous sculptures. Lurien took up a candle, pinching its base between two fingers, and pointed from time to time at passing objects. Gilded scales, armor-plated urns, and an easel supporting a half-finished painting. One object in particular caught Lurien's attention, and he stopped before a table upon which sat an orb of glass fused onto a golden disc. Within the orb floated a bead of pure white that twisted and undulated like a living thing, adopting a new fantastical shape with every passing second. It resembled the energies that had often floated about Isma, but this was far more substantial, condensed into something real. At the sight of it, I began to ache, deep in my chest. Hunger? Lurien asked. The singular eye of his mask was trained upon me. He waited, as if for a reply that would never come. An eager, black maw opened within me, but I did not reach out. He slid the golden disc across the table. Eat, he said, and tipped it over the side. The disc fractured against the tiles, and the glass exploded into 100 pieces, scattering beneath the bookcases. The nebulous, pale energy, the soul, fled its prison and expanded into the open air. The maw within me responded to the new command by opening even wider, to the point that I felt I might split apart. A spectral wind emanated from my body and set the nearby scrolls to fluttering. The soul floundered within this wind, like an aspid trapped in a cage of brambles. With a flash of light, the soul vanished into me. Warmth suffused my shell, and the maw cracked shut. Better, Lurien said, after appraising me. He set off down another aisle, removing the glass shards from his path with a push of his foot. At the far side of the room, beside an open window, stood a huge apparatus of interlocking metal tubes and panes of glass. The thing was angled downward toward the city. Lurien approached it with more haste than I had ever witnessed from him, and he halted at its lower end beside a stool. Look, he said, the acoustics of the room making his voice a giant. Come, sit. I did as I was bid, and he adjusted the small end of the apparatus so that it was parallel with my mask. The distorted lens glimmered dully with reflected candlelight. Lurien tapped the apparatus. Look, he insisted. I leaned forward and saw the city. The rain and billowing mist disguised much, but the tall buildings and twinkling lumifly lampposts were unmistakable. At Lurien's touch, the apparatus pivoted on well-oiled joints, and the image changed. I spied the tiny, pointed figures of guards patrolling the streets, and commoner bugs huddled together beneath awnings. Again, the view changed, and I saw Hagemol marching at the head of a great host, Drya at his side. Warrior bugs wielding nails and lances followed him into the mouth of a tunnel. Lurien lifted the eyepiece, seeming content with his presentation. He looked out over the city and approached the railing before the open window. In the far distance, the centipedal cluster of lights, Hagemol's army, had begun to disappear beyond the bounds of the city's cavern. And we stood there for a time, watching the starry trail grow shorter. Come, Lurien eventually said.
We passed through an innocuous door beside a plinth of stone. Beyond was a room, much smaller than the last, but even more cluttered. There were no curios or oddities, merely a pedestal and a tall chair. Stacked all about them were the discarded shells of lesser bugs. They were sheared flat on one side and served a purpose much like a scroll or tablet. Many were covered with cream-colored paint in the smooth, curling patterns of some written language. Lorraine sat at the chair and drew a bucket of paint out from behind the pedestal. He rummaged briefly, then placed an unmarked shell tablet before himself. "Read," he whispered. In one fluid motion, Lorraine dipped his spindly finger into the bucket and flourished it like a quill. The white contrasted with the blackness of his claw as he scribbled upon the surface of the shell. Arches and lines and circles collected into a cumulative message, one that I could somehow understand.
"Vessel, we are at last alone, and I am granted a moment to gather my thoughts. Words are ever a toil. Thus, this medium shall instead enable our rapport. For I know beyond doubt that you comprehend it, just as I did."
Lorraine dipped his finger again, mixing the paint into a slow whirlpool. The chair sat too high for him, and his feet dangled uselessly.
"A great destiny looms over us, you and I, and the others that might dare to call themselves dreamers. By the will of our great king, we are to serve a purpose incomparable in consequence, ultimate in sacrifice. And that destiny grows close. The candle of our nation gutters, and we possess not the time nor the privilege to delay."
A slow breath echoed from beneath Lorraine's mask. He flexed his fingers and freshened his makeshift quill.
"I have watched your progress. It is my king-given purpose. From seed to egg to nascent chrysalis, I witnessed your growth and the potential it betokened. The king is transcendent in his sculpting art. Perfection brushes you in a way yet unseen in our kind. And like a great drum, joy booms in the king's heart. But you and I—"
The paint ran dry upon Lorraine's finger. He scraped futilely to complete his thought before dipping back into the bucket and resuming. His writing grew faster.
"But you and I bear much the same mark. I see it in you as clearly as through my grand telescope, and know that such a mark is no blessed thing. In my forging long ago, the king espied in me that odious sign, and though I once shared the same purpose as you, such an honor was stripped of me upon discovery of my defect."
Lorraine's strokes consumed the last visible space upon the shell tablet, and he batted it off the pedestal. A chitinous crunch resounded as it hit the ground, and Lorraine replaced it with another.
"The king took great pains, invested much of himself, to hollow your being and gouge the frailty from your shell, just as he did mine. But though he pursues ideal in all his implacable fervor, true flawlessness is not our perquisite. Not even you, born of the king's own quintessence."
A pause, another application of paint.
"Time is too short. My resplendent lord perceives in you a long-awaited triumph, no matter the mark that festers within. Too much has he supped on failure. Too many has he offered to the slavering jaws of ambition, only to receive nothing in return. He shall not see your truth. He shall not see your flaw. And lamentably, it is not this watcher's station to voice dissension. For a word unwanted is a word unheard."
Lorraine hung his head. In contemplation or stupor, it was impossible to tell. His claw twitched, and white dripped from his digits. Minutes passed, but eventually he stirred and collected another swipe of paint.
"The mark within is a cancer of its own.
It is not born of the affliction, but serves as its antithesis. Many would call it boon, but for we instruments of the king, it is a thing most hated. It is mind, it is will, it is voice, and you, vessel, must not allow it to sully your purpose. You shall become the pillar upon which this kingdom teeters, and you must never fracture. Too many lives, too grand a future rests on what you must become. And so, I beg, please.
Lorraine stopped. He dug his sharp finger into the surface of the shell tablet until it cracked like glass, and then turned to me, placing his claw upon my shoulder. Paint smeared my cloak. With a force that his decrepit arm seemed incapable of, he pressed down on me. "Serve," he hissed, "thoughtless, eternal, for king, for bug, for Hallow Nest." I was gripped by something. Lorraine's words came to me like a constricting beast. They crushed me within my own shell, tyrannical and uncompromising. If any shard of thought lingered within me, then it was obliterated on the spot. The chair screeched as Lorraine rose. He braced nearly all his weight upon the pedestal, as if standing were simply too much. "Come," he breathed. "King." He pushed back to his full height, swaying toward the door and the chamber beyond. And I followed. It was my purpose.